Picture this. Eleanor, a sharp 78-year-old retired teacher from Ohio, had planned her dream Alaska cruise for over 2 years. She'd researched every port, bought new clothes, and even learned basic photography to capture the glaciers she'd dreamed of seeing since childhood. But on night 4, when the ship's alarm started blaring at 2 a.m., Eleanor's worst nightmare began. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom, announcing an emergency evacuation drill that had suddenly become real. Eleanor fumbled for her hearing aids in the darkness, but the ship's movement had knocked them off her nightstand. Without them, the muffled announcements sounded like underwater gibberish. She could see other passengers rushing past her balcony window, but she had no idea what was happening or where to go. As Eleanor struggled to understand the chaos around her, she realized something terrifying. She was completely cut off from the information that could save her life. The emergency lighting made it impossible to read the evacuation signs with her failing eyesight, and without her hearing aids, every announcement was just noise. What should have been a routine safety procedure became a life-threatening situation that lasted for terrifying hours. Eleanor's story isn't unique, and it's definitely not the worst thing that can happen to seniors on cruise ships. Over the next few minutes, you're going to discover the hidden dangers that cruise lines desperately don't want you to know about. These aren't the typical remember your sunscreen warnings you'll find in brochures. These are the real documented nightmares that have cost seniors their life savings, their health, and in some cases, their lives. What you're about to learn comes from maritime safety experts, emergency room doctors who treat cruise injuries, and thousands of seniors who learned these lessons the hard way. By the end of this, you'll have insider knowledge that could literally save your life or the life of someone you love. But first, we need to talk about the number one danger that turns every other problem into a financial catastrophe. Harold thought he was prepared. The 81-year-old retired accountant had checked every box on his cruise preparation list. Passport, medications, comfortable shoes. He even brought extra batteries for his blood pressure monitor. But what Harold didn't know was that his Medicare Advantage plan, the insurance he'd trusted for years, was about to abandon him in the most critical moment of his life. 3 days into his Alaskan cruise, Harold woke up unable to move the left side of his body. His roommate immediately called for help, and within minutes, Harold was being rushed to the ship's medical bay. The ship's doctor quickly determined Harold was having a stroke and needed immediate evacuation to a real hospital. A Coast Guard helicopter was dispatched, and Harold was airlifted to Anchorage in a dramatic rescue that saved his life. The bill arrived 6 weeks later, $127,000. The helicopter evacuation alone cost $78,000. The ship's emergency treatment added another $24,000. The 3 days in the Anchorage hospital brought the total to a number that made Harold's wife nearly faint. When they called their insurance company, expecting coverage, the representative delivered devastating news. Medicare doesn't cover you outside U.S. territorial waters. Harold's decades of paying premiums meant nothing once his ship crossed into international territory. Within 2 months, Harold and his wife had to sell their home to pay the medical bills. Their retirement savings, built over 40 years of careful planning, disappeared overnight. Harold survived his stroke, but the financial devastation destroyed the comfortable retirement they'd worked so hard to achieve. And here's the truly shocking part. Harold's story happens to hundreds of seniors every year, yet cruise lines never mention this during booking. Industry insiders reveal that medical evacuations from cruise ships cost anywhere from $50,000 to $200,000, depending on your location when disaster strikes. A simple broken bone can cost $75,000 by the time you factor in ship treatment, evacuation, foreign hospital care, and getting home. Without proper coverage, you're essentially gambling your entire financial future every time you step aboard. But medical bills aren't the only way seniors lose everything on cruises. The statistics are buried deep in maritime safety reports, but here's what cruise lines don't advertise. Falls account for over 65% of all serious injuries to passengers over 70. Patricia learned this the hard way during what should have been a relaxing evening on her Mediterranean cruise. The 73-year-old grandmother from Phoenix was simply trying to use the bathroom in her cabin when the ship hit unexpected rough seas near the Italian coast. As the vessel lurched, Patricia lost her footing on the small bathroom's wet floor. She fell hard, her ribs slamming into the marble countertop with a sickening crack. The impact punctured her lung and broke 3 ribs, turning a simple bathroom visit into a life-threatening emergency. What makes Patricia's story even more tragic is that it was completely preventable. Maritime safety experts know that ship bathrooms are death traps for seniors. The combination of tight spaces, hard surfaces, constant motion, and wet floors creates what one expert called the perfect storm for catastrophic falls. Yet cruise lines continue to design these spaces with aesthetics in mind, not safety for their aging passengers. Patricia spent the rest of her cruise in the ship's medical bay, struggling to breathe with her punctured lung. She missed every port she'd dreamed of visiting and required emergency surgery once the ship returned to Miami. The medical bills exceeded $95,000, but the lost memories and ruined vacation were priceless. Her daughter later revealed that Patricia never traveled again, too traumatized by the experience to leave her home state. But here's what's truly shocking. Cruise ships combine multiple fall risk factors that don't exist anywhere else. The constant motion affects inner ear balance. Unfamiliar layouts confuse spatial memory. Wet surfaces are everywhere, and lighting changes dramatically throughout the ship. For seniors already dealing with medication side effects, vision problems, or balance issues, it's like walking through a minefield. And the medical emergencies that follow these falls reveal another terrifying truth about cruise ship healthcare. Thomas had managed his diabetes perfectly for 15 years. The 79-year-old retired engineer followed his medication schedule religiously and kept meticulous blood sugar logs. But when flight delays forced him to miss his connection to Barcelona, Thomas faced a nightmare scenario that would nearly cost him his life. Stranded in Madrid for 2 extra days, Thomas ran out of his specific insulin formulation just as he was finally boarding his cruise ship. The ship's pharmacy carried insulin, but it was a different brand with different timing requirements. Thomas's body, accustomed to his regular medication, began rejecting the substitute. His blood sugar spiked dangerously, and within 24 hours, he was slipping into diabetic ketoacidosis. The ship's medical officer, trained for basic emergencies, was out of his depth with Thomas's complex medication crisis. The nearest port with proper diabetic specialists was 4 days away, and the ship's limited medical supplies couldn't handle prolonged intensive care. Thomas spent those 4 days drifting in and out of consciousness while his wife watched helplessly, knowing that each passing hour decreased his chances of survival. What Thomas and his wife didn't know was that cruise ship medical facilities are essentially glorified first aid stations. They're designed to handle seasickness and minor cuts, not complex medical emergencies. The staff, while competent for basic care, often lack the specialized training needed for serious conditions. Most ships don't even carry the advanced medications that many seniors require daily. Industry insiders reveal that when serious medical emergencies occur at sea, patients are essentially gambling with their lives until they can reach proper medical care. The ship's medical bay might look impressive in brochures, but it's no substitute for a real hospital with specialists, advanced equipment, and comprehensive pharmaceutical supplies. Thomas survived, but only because his wife had secretly packed extra medication against his protests. Many seniors aren't so lucky, and the next danger makes survival even more complicated. Ruth was being careful, or so she thought. The 74-year-old retired librarian had heard all the warnings about sun exposure and was wearing a wide-brimmed hat during her Greek island excursion. She'd even limited herself to just 2 glasses of wine during the local vineyard tour in Santorini. But what Ruth didn't know was that her body was already in crisis mode, and the beautiful Mediterranean sun was about to turn her dream vacation into a medical nightmare. By 3 p.m., Ruth was feeling dizzy and nauseous as the tour group climbed the steps to an ancient temple. She attributed it to excitement and kept pushing forward, not wanting to miss the historical site she'd studied for months. But when Ruth collapsed near the temple entrance, gasping for breath and barely conscious, the tour guide immediately recognized the signs of severe heat exhaustion. The terrifying part of Ruth's story isn't just what happened, but why it happened so quickly. As people age, their bodies lose the ability to sense thirst until dehydration is already dangerous. Ruth's morning coffee and lunch wine had actually made the problem worse, acting as diuretics that pulled even more water from her system. The blood pressure medication she took daily also affected her body's ability to regulate temperature and conserve fluids. Emergency medical specialists reveal that seniors on cruises face a perfect storm of dehydration risks. The combination of unfamiliar climates, increased alcohol consumption, medications that affect fluid balance, and the natural aging process creates a deadly trap. Ruth's case required immediate fluids and emergency transport to a Greek hospital, costing over $8,000 and ending her cruise 4 days early. But here's what's most shocking. Ruth's collapse could have been prevented with simple knowledge that cruise lines never share during safety briefings. Seniors need to drink water on a schedule, not based on thirst, because by the time they feel thirsty, they're already dangerously dehydrated. The wine with lunch, the coffee at breakfast, even the excitement of exploration all contribute to a medical emergency that strikes with frightening speed. And when seniors are vulnerable and confused from dehydration, they become perfect targets for the predators waiting at every port. Vincent thought he'd hit the jackpot. The friendly taxi driver in Barcelona spoke perfect English and offered to show the 77-year-old retired teacher authentic local spots that tourists never see. The driver seemed so knowledgeable, sharing stories about the city's history and promising to get Vincent back to his ship with time to spare. But what Vincent didn't realize was that he'd just become the victim of a sophisticated scam specifically designed to target elderly cruise passengers. The driver took Vincent to what he called his cousin's authentic souvenir shop, where Vincent was pressured into buying overpriced trinkets. Then came the special restaurant where Vincent was charged $200 for a simple lunch and told his credit card would be processed later. By the time Vincent realized something was wrong, he'd been charged over $800 for items worth maybe $50, and worse yet, he was lost in an unfamiliar part of Barcelona with his ship's departure time rapidly approaching. Vincent's panic grew as he realized the taxi driver had disappeared, leaving him stranded miles from the port with no idea how to get back. He eventually found his way to his ship with just minutes to spare, but the financial and emotional damage was done. The credit card charges continued appearing for weeks, and Vincent later learned that his information had been sold to other scammers who continued targeting him long after his cruise ended. Law enforcement officials reveal that seniors are specifically targeted by criminal networks operating around cruise terminals. Why? Criminals know elderly passengers often carry more cash, may be less familiar with local scams, and can be easier to confuse or intimidate. They literally wait for the ships to arrive, identifying older passengers who appear wealthy or confused. The scam tactics are sophisticated and constantly evolving. Fake taxi drivers work with corrupt shop owners, pickpocket teams create elaborate distractions, and con artists pose as helpful locals offering directions. Port security data shows that seniors are targeted 3 times more frequently than younger travelers, with average losses exceeding $600 per incident. But financial theft isn't the only danger waiting aboard the ship itself. Oist's nightmare began at 11 p.m. when the elevator suddenly stopped between Deck 7 and 8. The 82-year-old retired nurse was returning from the evening show when the ship's power fluctuated, trapping her in the small metal box with no way to call for help. But Joyce's situation was about to become much worse than a simple mechanical failure. Within minutes, Joyce felt a familiar tightness in her chest that signaled her angina was acting up. The stress of being trapped, combined with the ship's motion and her claustrophobia, triggered a cardiac episode that required immediate medication. But Joyce's nitroglycerin tablets were in her cabin, and the elevator's emergency phone wasn't working due to the power issues. For over 3 hours, Joyce remained trapped while her condition worsened. The ship's crew eventually located her through security cameras, but extracting her required calling the fire team and partially dismantling the elevator door. By the time Joyce reached the medical bay, she was in full cardiac distress and required emergency treatment that the ship's limited facilities were barely equipped to handle. What makes Joyce's story even more terrifying is that elevator emergencies on cruise ships are more common than passengers realize. Ships experience power fluctuations, mechanical failures, and rough weather that can trap passengers for hours. For seniors with medical conditions, these situations can quickly become life-threatening emergencies. But elevators aren't the only hidden hazard. Ships experience norovirus outbreaks that hit seniors particularly hard due to weakened immune systems. Weather-related tender cancellations can strand passengers in foreign ports without proper medication or support. Emergency lighting systems that work for younger passengers become useless for seniors with vision problems. Maritime safety experts reveal that cruise ships, despite their luxury appearance, are essentially floating cities with all the infrastructure problems that implies. Power outages, plumbing failures, communication breakdowns, and mechanical issues happen regularly. But these problems become exponentially more dangerous for elderly passengers who may need constant medical support or have mobility limitations. The difference between an inconvenience and a life-threatening emergency often comes down to age and preparation. After hearing all these horror stories, you might think the solution is to never cruise again. But here's the empowering truth. Every single one of these disasters could have been prevented with insider knowledge that cruise lines don't advertise and travel agents rarely mention. The reality is that over 25% of cruise passengers are now over 70, and the vast majority have safe, enjoyable experiences. The difference between those who cruise successfully and those who become horror stories isn't luck, it's preparation. Maritime safety experts and senior travel specialists have developed a comprehensive protection system that addresses every danger we've discussed. For insurance coverage, never cruise without travel medical insurance that specifically covers medical evacuation with a minimum of $250,000 coverage. Verify that pre-existing conditions are covered and that the policy works in international waters. The cost of proper insurance is typically less than $200, while a single medical emergency can cost over $100,000. Fall prevention requires packing shoes with maximum grip and testing them on wet surfaces before traveling. Always use handrails, request cabins near elevators, and bring night lights for bathroom navigation. Consider bringing canes even if you don't normally use them. The ship's motion affects everyone's balance. Medical emergency preparation means bringing double your required medications in separate bags, getting doctors' letters listing all conditions, and researching medical facilities in each port city. Never pack medications in checked luggage, and bring extra supplies including syringes, testing strips, and thermometers for temperature-sensitive drugs. For dehydration prevention, drink water on a schedule rather than waiting for thirst. Limit alcohol in hot climates, and monitor urine color to gauge hydration levels. Bring electrolyte supplements and recognize the symptoms of heat exhaustion before they become dangerous. Scam protection involves using only official transportation, staying in groups, carrying dummy wallets, and learning to say no thank you firmly in local languages. Never follow strangers to shops or restaurants, and take photos of taxi license plates before getting in. The truth is, knowledge doesn't make cruising scary, it makes it safe. Eleanor, from our opening story, learned these lessons and has now completed 8 successful cruises since her emergency evacuation nightmare. Harold's wife now travels with comprehensive medical insurance and has visited 15 countries without incident. Even Patricia returned to cruising after implementing proper fall prevention strategies. These aren't just tips. They're life-saving protocols developed by experts who understand the unique challenges seniors face at sea. With proper preparation, cruising remains one of the safest, most accessible ways for seniors to see the world. The key is knowing what cruise lines won't tell you and being prepared for situations they hope never happen. Your next cruise doesn't have to become a horror story. Armed with this knowledge, it can be the adventure you've always dreamed of, safely enjoyed without the nightmares that haunt unprepared travelers.